Hi guys, this is welcome to Blogging Heads. My name is Betsy Woodruff, and this is Woodruff and Strauss. Today, in for Daniel Strauss, we've got Andrew Lapin. Is that how you pronounce your last
Lapin.
name?
It's
Lapin.
Lapin, actually. No
Oh
worries, everyone does
man,
it.
officially 10
Actually,
seconds in, we're already having problems.
well, it's funny, Daniel does that too, and he's one of my best friends, and I always call him out for it too.
Oh, good. Okay, well, it
uh,
makes me feel better.
yeah, absolutely.
uh,
Yeah,
and we're going to be talking about Oscars today, Oscar politics, which should be really fun. Andrew, can you give sort of the 30-second spiel about yourself, your writing and journalism and movie background?
sure, absolutely. I'm a freelance film critic and journalist. I write for NPR, for The Dissolve, this film site that's owned by Pitchfork, the Washington City paper, a bunch of other places. And before that, I spent 2 years as a reporter at Current, which is a public media trade paper. So I was writing about nonprofit media and non-commercial broadcasting, that sort of thing. And I've been interested in movies my entire life. Started when I was very young, writing movie reviews for the Detroit News, and did it in college, and have sort of kept doing it as a passion project. So I'm very fortunate to be in the position where I get to write a lot about movies and think about them, and it's a very cool place to be.
Yeah, no kidding. What's your favorite movie?
My favorite movie is probably Spirited Away, which is
Okay.
this, Hayao Miyazaki animated film from 2001. It was the one that sort of got me really interested in movies, and a lot of the movies we're going to be talking about today are I don't think on that caliber, but every year there's always an interesting group of things to talk about. So
Yeah, no kidding.
yeah,
Great. For listeners, we're gonna talk really quickly about some of the studio politics of Oscars, and then we'll get more into specific movies. So I know basically nothing about movie industry politicking. I have no smart things to say about it. So I'm really interested to see, or can you just tell us sort of your perspective, big picture story of how Oscar lobbying works, and maybe if there are similarities between lobbying for movies to win these accolades and lobbying for legislation to get passed, etc.
oh, absolutely. I think you would actually feel right at home covering Oscar campaigns, and it's really fitting that we're talking about this on a political show because the Oscar season, which lasts roughly from like the holidays when all the big profile movies are coming out till the end of February when the Oscars are actually announced, it's so similar to political campaigns in sort of in every aspect. It's not really about how good the movies are. It's about how good their studios and their producers can campaign on the movie's behalf to this what's basically the same population of Oscar voters every year. And so these campaigns can take the form of like very just like egocentric benevolence, like in this case, the Imitation Game sort of pairing up with GLAAD and or sorry, not GLAAD, the Human Rights
Mm-hmm.
Campaign, and yeah, all to sort of promote like a very benevolent sort of this movie is so good, it's doing so many good things for people, like you should vote for it because it's accomplishing so much in society. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you get a lot of negative campaigning as well. Sometimes there'll be these sort of shadow campaigns, like people writing op-eds,
Really?
yeah, about like, oh, this movie, if it's based on true story, they'll say this movie gets all these things wrong, or this movie is, harmful, or it's racist, or you get all sorts of just like the worst kind of barbs thrown, every which way. And
Interesting.
yeah, it really is.
So you think some of like the really bitter criticism of sort of some of these high profile, like highbrow movies is bad faith oppo research type hits?
I would guarantee you that that's the case.
Really? Can you
Yes.
think of examples of something like where that's happened or where it looks like that?
Are
Even
you talking
like
about this year specifically?
like you see some of these movies, or I mean I think of like American Sniper, where, and we can talk about that in more detail later, but it just seems like everyone is really mad about American Sniper. I haven't seen the movie, but I'm curious. Like, how much of this is good faith, and is there an extent to which this is like, studio driven? And
Yeah. My rule of thumb is that if something in the news appears about an Oscar bait movie between, like I said, December and February, it is probably the work of a studio campaign.
interesting.
And the reason why I could say it is like, there are these legendary campaigners, people like Harvey Weinstein, who used to run Miramax forever and now runs the Weinstein Company, who has been known for pushing very traditionally minded, I guess you'd say, Oscar movies onto the public, and like he knows how to campaign, like on the back of his hand. And so,
What are some examples of like traditionally minded Oscar movies he's pushed on the public?
so there's this term that's called like prestige pictures, which generally
Uh-huh.
means like costume dramas, movies about that are like biographies of like really great important people. So like this year, the Weinstein Company is pushing The Imitation Game, which is this biography of Alan Turing, who it sort of crosses off all the bases of things that Oscar voters tend to like. It's a World War II movie. Its protagonist has I guess what you call like a lot of internal struggles, like with that he's gay and that he's growing up in a society that doesn't respect him, and he's also a genius. So all these kind of things, all these very stately performances, kind of classical cinematography. Anytime you see something like that, it's because someone somewhere knows that there's a good chance Oscar voters will go for it. And I keep referring to Oscar voters in this like monolith, and the reason for that is there was this famous like 2012 Los Angeles Times survey of every Oscar voter ever.
How many
It
Oscar
hasn't,
voters are there?
I believe, a couple thousand, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And every year the Academy inducts, a certain new crop of voters, and they never leave the Academy, so they stick around until they die. But
Hmm.
what the Times discovered was that over 90% of Oscar voters are white. Over I think like 70% are male, and a very large percentage of them are over the age of 60. So what
Huh.
you have are it's a very much a monolithic block of voters, and if you can figure out how to gear your campaign to them, that's how Oscars are won, and that's where this narrative comes from of like the Academy being out of touch with the reality of like today's cultural scene.
So when we talk about studios campaigning to win Oscars, I'm curious what's in it for studios. Besides the fact that like if a movie gets nominated for Best Picture or if it gets nominated for like some of the really prestigious awards like Best Director or Best Actor or Actress, like it seems like that's a definite way to boost like ticket sales. People are more likely to see Best Picture nominees than not. But are there other like concrete benefits to getting Oscar nominations besides ticket sales, or is this more about like prestige and wanting to be an elite studio?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely all feed into a part of it. Like having Oscar nominees and Oscar wins almost definitely will increase the movie's profile. It will sell a lot of tickets, but the benefits aren't always to that specific movie. If you're an actor and you've been nominated for an Oscar or you've won an Oscar, you can market yourself as like an Oscar-winning actor, and then you can, command a higher salary on your next movie, and your agent gets a cut of that and all that, and producers bolster their own reputations, as you said. The studios get their reputations boosted. You can attract better quality talents to future projects. And so this is the case even when a movie that has won a lot of Oscars but didn't do that well financially. Like from a few years ago, The Hurt Locker, which was
Mm-hmm.
like the last really big high-profile military movie, to get a lot of Oscar attention before American Sniper this year. That was, I think, the lowest grossing Oscar winning movie like in history. That it won Best Picture, or in recent history anyway,
Huh.
and it made almost no money at the time because like people didn't know about it. But that can still pay off way down the line. The director Catherine Bigelow became really in demand because she won a Best Director Oscar, and she became one of the few women to win. And so there's a lot of there are a lot of like exterior benefits that kind of feed this like Oscar industry. It's like this whole, it's the side of Hollywood where they say we can do important things, when we're not making superhero movies the other the other 40 weeks of the year. So yeah, there's definitely a side of that. I realize we're getting a bit away from this year, but
Yeah. Yeah,
I
no,
like
that's
talking
interesting.
about it. So
Oh yeah, no, it's totally fascinating. I know very, very, very little about this, so all this is really, really interesting to me. Um, so the benefits to studios then of winning Oscars are more better access to talent. People are more excited to work with them. If you were kind of a starry-eyed movie person, you dreamed your whole life of winning an Oscar, this is your chance. There's a
it's
lot of
the
it's a
myth,
lot of it
right?
seems yeah, it seems like it has to be
Yeah.
mostly intangible benefits, right?
Yeah, they can be intangible. I mean, there have been studies, and I don't have them in front of me, that have charted like what an Oscar win can mean, for a career or for a movie
Hmm.
or for a studio. And I think, it's always hard to draw a clear line and say like because X movie won an Oscar, then it's going to increase, by a certain number of ticket sales, because it's always unpredictable. And like sometimes people will just rebel against, what the Academy picks. Like if there's like a major upset like Crash, from about 10 years ago that beat out Brokeback Mountain, and Crash was a pretty financially successful movie, but you could argue that winning the Oscar in that case really hurt the movie's reputation, because people think back on it and they think that was the movie that beat Brokeback Mountain. And it's sort of, so now it's sort of held up as being like this very sanctimonious, very kind of liberal, pandering movie about race relations that didn't deserve to win the Oscar. Or like The
And it was
Artist.
marketed as like, here's the movie Crash. It's about how there's not racism anymore, stuff like right, like,
Yeah,
like,
one movie
good,
solved all of
good job,
racism.
guys,
That was 10 years
awesome,
ago.
it's so
Yeah,
great,
yeah.
it's so
The
easy.
Academy they really did their job there. But yeah, I think there are definitely cases where winning an Oscar, if it's perceived as like you just playing into the hands of the Academy, can actually hurt, your career, or certain perceptions. But
Isn't there
Harvey,
something? Isn't there
go ahead.
something like an Oscar curse where actors will win Best Actor or Best Actress, and then the next project that comes out that they do is really, really horrible, like Halle Berry and Catwoman, or I think Charlize Theron did like some like Aeon Flux or some weird superhero movie right after she did Monster.
Yeah, well, there are sort of these weird instances. I mean, sometimes what you'll see is, actors have to keep working, right? So even as
Yeah.
they're campaigning for an Oscar for a movie they filmed like a year ago,
Hmm.
they are also making like a shitty like sci-fi movie, like Aeon Flux,
Hey, speak for
that
yourself.
yeah, sorry. That will, that it's that movie's own markers can then take advantage of the fact that Charlize Theron just won an Oscar by releasing the movie, and it stars Charlize Theron, even though she'd probably rather that not be out there. Um, so yeah,
Interesting.
actors have to keep working is sort of I think the roundabout way of saying that. Like you can't,
Uh-huh.
no one is so powerful except for Daniel Day-Lewis, where they can only pick the movies that are super prestigious, that mean the most, to
Hmm.
them. And, most people just kind of have to take what they can get, and you can command a higher salary, like Reese Witherspoon, after she won her Oscar for Walk the Line. She was in like this movie called How Do You Know? It was like this romantic comedy a few years ago, and it was a very kind of middle of the road comedy. But she was able to parlay her, firstly her box office success, but also definitely her Oscar win. And I think her salary was, very, very high for that movie, and it sort of outpaced the salaries of everyone else involved, and so that sort of thing. And there are all these benefits that play out, way down the line. But then
Interesting.
there are always people who get nominated, like actors who do like one movie and then they kind of disappear after they win an Oscar or whatever.
So,
So
I,
it's
so
it's
I
hard to predict.
So I would assume studios are hire PR firms to handle their Oscar campaigns, or do you know, or is this, or like, are there PR firms that are just really good about helping movies get Oscars because they're like a boutique industry there?
I think a lot of these cases, the studios are the PR firms, right?
Okay.
So they have these whole wings of what they do that are devoted to making art films, to making movies that are meant to appeal to the Academy, and then
Hmm.
they're the ones that are kind of fronting the money for, there are all these tours and sort of press junkets that happen so that an Oscar campaign can proceed. All these gala benefits to attend, things like that. I mean, that is all very much built into the studio like makeup of how they advertise a movie.
Hmm.
If they're advertising it as an Oscar movie, then they need to keep up that advertising for months, both leading up to the choices of nominations, then leading up to the actual Oscars, and then in the trail off after the Oscars, where you can actually say that your movie is an Oscar winner. So I think that all falls on the studio. I wouldn't be surprised if, behind closed doors, they are employing some like Oppo firm to go out and do their dirty work. There was this very suspicious op-ed that came out in December that was sort of attacking the movie Selma in the Washington Post. That it was written by LBJ's former advisor, but it sort of had this feel of this came out right at the time when this movie needs a lot of positive, press in order to get Oscar nominations, and now this very significant person is coming out of nowhere and saying that this is it's a terrible representation of LBJ, and he ended his piece, I thought, in a very suspicious way by saying that because of these purported inaccuracies, Selma should be ruled out of the coming award season. That was his word. Like, why would a political advisor say that, right?
Yeah, right.
That sounds like something that another studio wants to say through the mouth of like
Right.
someone who has
Yeah. Kind of showing your cards there. Interesting.
Yeah,
That's
case
funny.
it sort of worked, unfortunately.
Huh. Well, I guess so now that we have sort of this groundwork of what lobbying for Oscar wins looks like and everything, the first movie I want to talk about is Imitation Game
Sure.
because I think it's a good movie, but it didn't strike me as like a great movie. If that makes sense. I don't know. I'm not sure what your thoughts on the movie as a whole were. It kind of felt to me like a really high quality, well done Lifetime movie, sort of.
Oh, it's Lifetime movies.
But
Wow.
like in a really good way, like the best way possible. But it was just kind of like, you know exactly what's gonna happen. Like you know exactly what's gonna happen. Surprise free, at times a little saccharine, at times a little hokey.
Mhm.
Has a great message, but not necessarily. It didn't strike me as necessarily like a great work of art. Um,
Yeah. I get where you're coming from. I sort of felt the same way about it. I really like Benedict Cumberbatch. I think he was very good in the movie. I liked that someone was telling the story of Alan Turing. Like it's the
totally,
sort of thing that
agreed,
needs
100%.
to get out there. But when I look at a movie like this, where that is about a real person who did something really significant, what I want to know is, does this movie make me feel like I know that person, or that I know the things that they did? Or is it just this kind of generic, like he was great, and
Yeah,
and I felt like this was much more the latter.
agreed, agreed. And it's interesting looking at how the campaign for that film getting Best Picture has gone. Is
Hmm.
it Human Rights Campaign is the organization that
Yeah,
took out a pretty major, I think maybe a New York Times ad. Was that the New York Times saying Alan Turing was one of thousands and thousands of gay men in the United Kingdom who was punished because it was illegal, um,
hmm
and which is true, which is horrible. And the argument the ad kind of makes is honor Alan Turing, honor the memory of these other gay men who faced criminal repercussions for being who they were. Give Therefore this movie should get Best Picture. And I don't know a ton about the history of Oscar campaigning, but is that the kind of sort of overt alliance with an organization that's typically seen as quite political? Is that unusual? Like, is that new, or is this something that's within, you know?
the political side of it, I don't know enough about. I will say aligning your movie with real world organizations that can put a positive face on your movie, that is definitely something that has been done with Oscar campaigning forever.
Mm-hmm.
A few years ago, this movie called The Reader, which was a Holocaust drama, came out and came out of nowhere and was nominated for Best Picture, which was also produced by Harvey Weinstein, who produced The Imitation Game, who was this, who's like the Swami of Oscar campaigning, and that movie, to campaign for that, they went to a lot of like Holocaust, memorial centers. They talked to, Holocaust survivors, and it was like this very, to my mind, it felt like a very saccharine kind of like maudlin attempt to say, if you vote for this movie, you are voting for the memory of the Holocaust, and aligning those things
Do you
in
like
voters'
Hitler or
minds.
something?
Yeah, no, exactly. It's like for this one, oh, you're conflating for the HRC's campaign. They are really conflating the life of Alan Turing with this movie, which is one interpretation of his life, right? And they're saying that this movie equals Alan Turing, which is not true. There is so much more to Alan Turing than what you see in The Imitation Game. And in fact, one of the main criticisms of The Imitation Game is that it sort of does a disservice to his legacy, because it simplifies his sexuality. It really streamlines his code breaking genius by sort of making the whole movie about this one computer and showing that he worked alone, which wasn't really the case. And so just because there is a movie about a person or about an event does not mean that that has to be like the definitive word on that person or that event. And I think that's something that is really easy to get lost in Oscar season because you need to boil everything down. Everything becomes what in Hollywood they call a log line, which is like a one sentence description of a movie, right? And so you can't really get any more complex than that. And in the case of The Imitation Game, the log line is like, this is the story of Alan Turing, you know, persecuted for crimes of homosexuality, but he did so much during World War II to stop the Nazis, and he was a great man, and this is the movie about him. And so if you support him, you have to like support the movie, which is just kind of, yeah. I mean, it works on a lot of voters, but I just think, other critics and I are just kind of like, well, that's a really absurdly simplistic way to view movies. I mean, to say that just because a movie exists, we have to award it and say like, good job. There should be more to this whole idea of handing out awards, but
right,
I'm cynical and I know better.
It's not an award for best historian, right?
Like, well, it wouldn't, and if it was, it would lose, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not really an accurate history. I mean, it's a dramatic interpretation of his history, and one that, in the minds of some critics, like it can be like really harmful.
Sorry, can you repeat that? You just froze it for like a half second. Can you just repeat that? In the minds of some critics, just that sentence.
I would say, in the minds of some critics, like the sort of history that The Imitation Game shows can be really harmful because it's not, because the movie doesn't actually show him in any sort of moment of passion with another man, right? It sort of takes the very easy way out when depicting when depicting his sexuality. It really relies a lot on like the persecution side of it. It relies a lot on his platonic relationship with with his sham wife or whatever. So there's this degree of like, we're going to make this movie as easy as possible for like the movie going public to figure out.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. It's like, besides the very general subject matter, it's not really a brave movie about gay rights.
Yeah. I
mean, if telling the story, I mean, having a gay protagonist is arguably, because there's not a ton of movies where like the story is the story of a gay person. Usually they're like supporting characters or sidekicks or whatever. So to that extent, it's something new and different. But like beyond that, I mean, it's not like Orange is the New Black or something where they actually delve into these relationships and, present people's sexuality as part of who they are.
Or like a better, not a better analogy, but like maybe an analogy that fits within more of the medium is like a few years ago, there was the movie Milk, which was, like a decent movie about Harvey Milk, first openly gay politician in office. And that was a movie that, kind of took the same similar frameworks of a story because he met a tragic end and all that. But it actually showed him having a passionate, relationship with his boyfriend. And I mean, there was a lot more to it. It was more explicit, and not that movies have to be explicit, but that it just felt more like an honest depiction of what it was like to be gay during that time, whereas Imitation Game, I sort of felt like you could swap out the dilemma of his gay identity with the dilemma of anyone else, sort of secretive identity. Like if someone was secretively Jewish or, was trying to hide some other sort of part of their background from the people around them, it would look very similar to what this movie looks like. So I wouldn't say it's like a uniquely, there's like a whole separate category of like gay cinema. And I don't necessarily think that this would fit in with that because it doesn't do that much with the idea that he's gay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, next movie where there's an interesting political component is let's talk about Selma.
Right.
I haven't seen this one. I'm just going to see it tonight or tomorrow. Full disclosure, I'm gonna defer to you as the Selma expert here. But you mentioned this Washington Post op-ed basically saying Selma is full of lies and nobody should ever go watch it ever.
Yeah, exactly. No one should nominate it for anything ever. That's the important part. Don't forget that.
Right, yeah. Can you go through like what the Selma controversy looks like, and if it's a serious thing, like how it works?
Sure. I mean, Selma is the story of Martin Luther King Jr. and his efforts to organize to organize the civil rights march in Selma, Alabama, to to push for voting rights for Black people, and it's set in this like very concentrated span of time. Where he's sort of, Lyndon Johnson is publicly he is on King's side, but like behind closed doors, they were having a lot of disagreements about how fast to move in the minds of progress, and the movie, and I guess what LBJ's advisor is objecting to is that the movie shows LBJ as being more reticent, more sort of like careful about how much politically to kind of show his cards. He doesn't want to come out and make an executive order against Alabama. He wants to focus on the war on poverty. He wants to do all these other things. And King has a very different set of priorities because he wants equality now, and he is really concerned with the lives of people on the ground. And so that's a dynamic that plays out during the film, right? There are all these really intense scenes of like King and LBJ together in the White House, and they're arguing about what needs to be done. And it's not that they hate each other. It's that they both agree that progress needs to be made, but they can't. It's hard when when you're covering politics to move quickly on any sort of issue.
Mm-hmm.
Never mind in the 1960s when you're dealing with civil rights. So the advisor is basically just worried that the movie tarnishes LBJ's legacy in contrast to King by showing that he was not supportive of the march, which I don't think it shows. A lot of this kind of boils down to a matter of opinion of like how you perceive the movie to be showing, because he's not objecting to like a fact necessarily. He's objecting to just the characterization of LBJ, which is an interesting thing in and of itself, right? He's sort of saying that I don't think LBJ comes off as good of a person as he should be in this movie. Now, the reason why a lot of people sort of took offense to that is that Selma is the first big studio movie to be made about Martin Luther King. It is one of the only high-profile studio movies to have been directed by a Black woman, Ava DuVernay. It is one of the only Hollywood movies so far to focus on the civil rights struggle from the perspective of its Black leaders, as opposed to the perspective of benevolent white people like LBJ.
What? A movie about the civil rights movement that's about Black people? What?
I know.
That's crazy.
And so people think that it reveals something ugly about how we perceive movies, when the instant there's a movie that is not about a white person comes out, the primary objection anyone has is to a minor white character, in the movie.
Yeah.
And so it touched on a lot of these really kind of ugly racial undertones about how we as Americans are ready to process diversity in film, diversity in how we understand our country's history, through works of film, and also kind of plays on as I mentioned, the racial makeup of Oscar voters. Most of whom are not Black, most of whom are white, and who tend to award movies about white people. So it sort of came to a head of like, because this movie may not be a 100% faithful representation of this period of history, which, by the way, no historical movie is, but because this
I don't know. Have you seen
particular movie
Pocahontas?
yeah, exactly. No, she really, that's all a
Nailed it.
historical record. Colors of the Wind, talking trees, all that stuff. It's not, yeah, right. But like the Imitation Game, or like, so many other movies that are nominated this year, and this is the case every year, they're based on true events, because because people like movies based on true events. But because it's Hollywood, it's not a work of journalism. It's not 100% accurate. And I would actually be interested to hear your thoughts on like how you view movies that are based on true events, but but aren't totally accurate. Like, is there this fear that people will just see it as 100% true, or can we give people the benefit of the doubt and say like you can people understand that it's a work of fiction that's based on history as opposed to
Yeah.
actual history.
That's a good question. And I'm honestly, I don't love biopics.
Hmm.
I don't love the idea of sort of the go-to movie mode being doing movies that are based on historical narratives. I think movies tend to be better when they're fiction, because you don't have those constraints to worry about. You can focus on the story instead of historical accuracy. You can sort of put the artistic priorities ahead of the documentary priorities.
Yeah.
I think the best movies are ones that are not just sort of recreating the lives of people who've lived before. Um, so the fact that like so many of the Best Picture nominees do that, I mean, what? It's not all of them, but I think that the majority of Best Picture nominees are based on historical figures, right?
I would
Um,
say probably about half of them, maybe.
because what do we have?
Yeah.
American Sniper is historic. Selma is historic. Imitation Game is historic. Theory of
And
Everything is
do
historic.
everything. I believe
Um,
I believe that's it. No, Foxcatcher wasn't nominated, so I
right,
think it's those four.
those four.
Um, yeah,
And then the ones that aren't based on historic narratives are Boyhood,
Grand
um,
Budapest Hotel,
Grand Budapest Hotel,
yeah,
and
Birdman,
Birdman,
and Whiplash, which is also
and
an original
Whiplash.
story. Yeah,
Okay, okay, so
so
half and half.
four based on truth, yeah, four
Yeah,
not.
yeah. The ones I haven't seen yet that I'm going to hopefully see this weekend are Theory of Everything, Selma, and American Sniper.
Hmm.
But I think the fictionalized ones are better of the ones that I've seen. I mean, I thought Whiplash was fantastic, like just crazy and weird and totally engrossing and really fun to watch. And I think if that had been
Yeah, for sure.
based on a true story, it would have been a lot more annoying.
It's
Um,
it's hard sort of from the movies industry's perspective. Like it seems important to tell fictionalized versions of real stories to kind of get that out there to
mm-hmm,
have artistic interpretations
right.
on film. And I can certainly see where you're saying where it is always kind of troubling when there's a movie that is based on truth that is sort of that wants that it wants the prestige of like being true, but it also
Right,
wants the
yeah.
artistic license to do whatever it wants. Uh,
Exactly.
and as a journalist, that that can be frustrating. That
Totally.
to see what people
Totally.
can get away with.
And I hate the idea that you have to be able to slap based on a true story on a film for people to take it seriously or for
Sure.
people to find that story compelling. Like I think that impulse, that true stories are necessarily more compelling than fictional stories. I mean, in a way, yes, if something has happened, it makes it more compelling than if it hasn't happened. But I think when we're talking about like artistic value and cultural value, and the ability of stories to transform the people who are hearing or watching those stories, I think it's sort of a cheap shortcut to say, oh well, it's based on a true story, so it's going to be more moving. I just find that very frustrating. That said, there's a ton of fantastic biopics. I don't think it's a bad genre at all. Um, but I don't like that there's sort of this automatic impulse that everything has to be based on something that's already happened before. Like one of my favorite
I
movies
guess
of the
what you're saying.
last 5-10 years is Tree of Life, which obviously has nothing to do with reality at all. But it's fantastic. So that's probably where I come down on it from sort of a journalistic perspective.
It's interesting to look at Selma in that way because it's obviously based on a true story, but it's filtered through the lens of 2014. It like feels very modern in the way that the marching scenes are staged. There's a lot of overtures to like to modern day political protests, which was a very deliberate choice on the part of the
Mm,
director, and that
interesting.
has this really great effect of connecting the past to the present and saying, the struggle is never over. People from 40, 50 years ago were fighting, the same fights that we're fighting. Obviously, with the Supreme Court gutting, key parts of the Voting Rights Act recently, like this is still a very relevant issue, even though it happened so long
Does it
ago.
really
And
have crash syndrome?
well, Crash wasn't based on a true story.
Right,
Crash
yeah.
was Paul Haggis just trying to tell everyone to get along. Um, he was actually originally supposed to direct Selma before.
Really?
Yeah, it would have been a
That's
very different movie.
that's interesting. That's really
It-
interesting. Huh.
yeah, yeah, there were a bunch of different directors in line. Actually, speaking of like this true story issue, the filmmakers did not have the rights to use Martin Luther King's original speeches in this movie because they are separate. They were like given separate like copyright.
Excuse me.
Um, so yeah, that's fine. So they had to completely work around that, right? And that
Huh.
is naturally going to create differences but it doesn't necessarily mean that because they didn't use his exact words that the whole movie is invalid. So I thought it was very interesting to look at how the past is perceived through the lens of today and through the lens of a black filmmaker who is very conscious about how black people have been depicted on film as victims or as sort of helpless, and now she's really letting them
and stuff.
Yeah, she's letting them take agency in Selma in a way that they actually did in real life, but that has not been expressed on screen, in the 50 years since. So I think that there's a lot to unpack there, and that's why I really like the movie. Unfortunately, the Academy did not like the movie so much, and they only nominated it for two awards. So there's still a ways to climb, I think, before we're really at the equal progress level.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So the last movie to talk about briefly is American Sniper, which I feel like maybe the most controversial movie of the year. Probably?
I think so. It really came out of nowhere. Before it really come out in the majority of theaters, it got all these Oscar nominations, and Selma didn't get that many, and then suddenly, it had this huge box office. I mean, it has made more money than all the other Best Picture nominees put together. So,
jeez, has it beaten Passion of the Christ?
That is a good question. I don't think it has yet.
Okay, I think it's on track too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
which
would make it.
It's not about Jesus. Jesus has like a built-in audience. To sort of give you, so I found this article by the New York Times when they were first writing about the movie's like opening weekend box office, which was amazing. And they have this passage in there that is so sort of politically charged and will probably sound really familiar to you. So I'm just going to read it.
Okay.
While America's coastal intelligentsia busied itself with chatter over little-seen art dramas like Boyhood and Birdman, everyday Americans showed up en masse for a patriotic, pro-family picture that played more like a summer superhero blockbuster than an R-rated war drama with 6 Oscar nominations. Now, does that sound familiar, right?
A little bit.
Pro-family, patriotic, everyday America. Like this is the language that politicians use all the time.
Totally, yeah.
Like when they want you to vote for them.
So you think that was written by someone who's trying to sort of do a little bit of incept the Academy voters?
I mean, it was written by a New York Times staff writer. It
Okay.
wasn't an option or anything, so I wouldn't want to perceive any motivation on their part. But that to have that sort of characterization of a movie that that if you were to just watch the movie sort of independent of any of this other political, chatter, I don't think you would necessarily perceive it as like a conservative movie. I don't think that reading is there. I mean, personally, I thought the movie was a little dull, but like that's just me. A lot of people love it, and that's fine. But,
do you think America's a little dull?
Do
you think our families are a little dull?
I've walked into a trap here. I see that. But there's something about that interpretation of the film that I find really insulting, like more so than the film itself. Like the idea that this movie, as opposed to Boyhood, is pro-family. And Boyhood is about a family, right? It's about a family in Texas. It is like Boyhood is about an everyday American family, and yet this is the little scene art drama, and American Sniper is like the pro-family movie. Like that doesn't make any sense to me.
I mean, Birdman's about a family too.
It is really
deals with some family issues in a very serious, heavy-duty way.
Exactly, and honestly, like American Sniper, the dude spends most of the movie trying to get away from his family because he'd rather be in Iraq sniping people. Like that's one of the really intense psychological parts of the movie, and to just say that it's pro-family is just not true. It's
right,
and
that phrase is basically meaningless because nobody's anti-family.
Yeah, I hate families.
Families are
come
bad.
out on anti-family stance.
People should just kick their kids out when they're 10. That's not the way to do it. Don't ever get married. Yeah, right. Like that means nothing. It's like Scott Walker saying he loves America. Like, oh, good to know. Glad you're on the record saying that. Well, write that in my notebook. It doesn't mean anything.
Unlike my opponent. I love
yeah, exactly. It's meaningless. It's not bad, but it's meaningless. I do think, though, that's an interesting point there in that American Sniper has obviously resonated with viewers in a way that like Birdman and Boyhood have not. And as a person who lives on the East Coast and writes for an East Coast based publication, and I saw Birdman and Boyhood, and I'm finally like squeaking an American Sniper at the last minute. Like I'm definitely part of the problem, if you will. So I'm clearly not in the real American category here.
Yeah.
But I do think it's very interesting and important that this movie is making such an insane amount of money. And I think the fact that of these Best Picture films, the fact that it's made more than all of them combined, that's amazing. Uh, I assume, have you seen all the Best Picture nominees by now?
I have.
You
I
have.
saw them all. I saw The Theory of Everything
Nice.
yesterday, so now I've crossed them all off my list.
Nice. Very good. That's good. I had you on for a reason, man. Um,
I'm the guy.
I'm just like argle bargle. I haven't seen these movies.
That's fine.
But what do you make of the fact that American Sniper has made so much more money, and has not just made so much more money than the other nominees, but is on track to break a record? Like, is there a larger lesson here? Is there something studios can learn? Like, what's sort of the big takeaway, if you will?
I think yeah, the box office was amazing. No one could have really predicted just how well it would have done. Like, I mean, I figured it would do really well
Uh-huh.
just in January and February for a couple different reasons. One is that it sort of follows in the footsteps of like Lone Survivor, which was a military movie that came out last January and did very
Hmm.
well. That it was coming out during a time when there wasn't a whole lot else in the movies, so there wasn't a lot of competition. And it stars Bradley Cooper, who is like a huge star, and directed by Clint Eastwood, who a lot of people like to make fun of, but who can still make really solid movies that bring in a lot of money when he tries.
Hmm.
Um, it had a lot of things going for it, right? That doesn't entirely explain how massively successful it was, but it can go away towards me understanding like it seems to have captured a national moment. Like people want to see stories um, about soldiers, stories about the military, stories that sort of uh, paint the military in a positive light. One of the things that people are praising about the movie, which I agree with, is that it has a very nice sense of like what it's like for a veteran when they come home, right?
Hmm.
And that's like something that you don't see a lot in movies, and that the movie kind of it deals with very nicely. And so you can imagine like military families saying like, oh, this really resonates with me, like I'm going to take people to see it. And then you could also sell it as an action movie because it has like people's heads getting blown off and stuff like that. So you really cornered a lot of different angles with
Different
it.
demographics.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah, for sure. But
Any
yeah,
thoughts
go.
on why it's done so much better than all the other war on terror movies, like Hurt Locker or Zero Dark 30 or Lone Survivor?
Sure.
Do you think it's because
Um,
like with this ISIS stuff, people are more excited about the American military maybe than they have been? Like, do we
Gosh, I hope
do we
not.
like it? But I mean that would maybe be an explanation, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I'm not a huge movie buff. I haven't seen most of the war on terror movies, but thoughts on that?
Well, you might like this. I think the fact that it's based on a true story is
Okay,
certainly helping it.
but so
Chris
is
Kyle.
Zero Dark 30. So is Lone
That's
Survivor.
true. Well, yeah, and those both did well, and
Yeah,
Hurt Locker did not do well, and Hurt Locker was not based on a true story. Well, I mean,
interesting.
it was based on the characters were based on a magazine article, but the construction of the movie was pretty fictional.
Right, it's not presented
Um,
as.
yeah,
Okay, go
yeah.
on.
I mean, that's part of it. I think the myth surrounding Chris Kyle is another big part of it.
Hmm.
His autobiography sold very well before the movie came along,
Okay.
and the circumstances surrounding his death, the murder trial, is actually playing out right now. Like as this movie is breaking box office records in theaters,
Hmm.
there's like a lot of there's a lot of sort of morbid intrigue around it. So I think that's playing a part as well. Uh, and something about it, as opposed to Lone Survivor, which was not nominated for any Oscars, seems to carry more of a prestigious feel to it, which is
Hmm.
why it like did so well with the Oscars. And because it did so well with the Oscars, I'm sure that has really helped its box office. It's sort of like they kind of play into each other. Um, it's not. It is. You would say it's patriotic in the sense that it shows positive portrayals of American soldiers, but it is not so far to that end that that it totally turns off, like other audiences.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's an element of it that like people are definitely like studios are rushing into making more sniper movies now and more like military movies because they want a piece of that. Stuff doesn't get directly marketed to Middle America that often. It just doesn't. And so
Which
this,
seems like a no-brainer because there's a lot of people in Middle America.
I know, right? I mean, movies like Birdman don't exist for Middle America.
No.
I mean, and I don't.
My
I'm not.
parents are never going to see Birdman.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to be.
Nothing
I
wrong
don't
with
want
that
to like
at all.
disparage. I hate doing like an us versus them kind of thing.
Yeah.
But like this movie is like very explicitly trying to be this sort of like modern day Western and painting the hero as this cowboy figure, and at the same time sort of celebrating the military and the work that it does, and there is value in that from the perspective of like people who want to see these movies. So yeah, I don't necessarily know what that means for its Oscar chances. I think there are a lot of problems with the movie that sort of you either all you want to discuss are the problems with the movie, or all you want to discuss is how great the movie is. That's the perception I'm getting from like the conversation I'm seeing around the movie. Like there isn't a lot of room for someone to just say, "Oh, well, it was okay. I thought it did this right and this wrong," which is sort of where I fall down.
Interesting. People aren't really lukewarm on it.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, with Zero Dark 30, it was sort of like everyone was all over. Like a lot of critics loved it when it first came out, and I actually can't stand the movie anymore, especially when the most recent CIA report came out, where it really seems like everything they were doing on that movie was sort of like it was sort of exactly what the CIA wanted, and it didn't really feel like an honest look at the hunt for Bin Laden. But this is a bit different.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, yeah. The thing to consider with this movie is that Chris Kyle was a very different person from what the movie shows him to be. He had in the book he has this braggadocio where he likes to boast about all these crazy things that he probably never did because they're unverifiable.
Uh-huh.
But things like he would talk about how in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, he and his buddies like drove down to New Orleans and would start like sniping looters from the top of the Superdome, like things like that.
Incredibly illegal.
Right. Yeah, it's like totally absurd and it makes
Yeah.
no sense, right? But it tells you something about the character of someone who would want that story to be propagated about him.
Right.
And that person is not the star of American Sniper, if that makes sense. The movie is about a sniper who happens to be named Chris Kyle, but as far as I can tell, it's not actually about the real Chris Kyle, because it doesn't really get into the flaws of his character that a lot of people identify with who he was.
Interesting. Very interesting. Cool. Well, just to wrap up really quickly, do you have any predictions or hopes? Is there like a movie you hope win, a movie you think will win?
I hope Selma will win. I don't think it will, but I think that Boyhood will win, and I am okay with that because I really liked Boyhood. What of it? Do you want all the categories?
What do you think for Best Actor?
Best Actor. I think it'll probably be Michael Keaton for Birdman. Eddie Redmayne seems like a possibility for The Theory of Everything as well, because the Academy really likes it when people play like disabled. when they like disfigure themselves. Yeah, well, just disabled people. Like when they disfigure themselves in some way, it's like all golden. And I mean, he's fine in it, but I guess I'd rather see Michael Keaton win just because it's such a bizarre role for him, and it's really pretty fascinating to watch. Best Actress, it seems like everyone is predicting that Julianne Moore is going to win for Still Alice, which I haven't seen, but I'm disappointed because I really like 3 of the other nominees, and I don't think they have a shot.
Who are the 3 you like?
So I really like Marion Cotillard in 2 Days, One Night. I really like Reese Witherspoon in Wild, and I really like Rosamund Pike in Gone Girl. I think she's like terrifying in that movie, and it totally works. But Julianne Moore is strong enough where it doesn't really seem like the other 3 are going to have a shot at it. So I just kind of have to live with that. It's not all about who wins. Like 10 years down the line, the good movies will stand out. So I keep telling myself that. This is like a
Emotionally
spectrum.
fortify
But
yourself.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Will you be watching?
Yeah, definitely,
Cool.
definitely. I'm just trying to make sure that I plan my next 72 hours really well, so I can get in the last three best pictures I haven't seen.
So do you always try to do that? Do you try to
No,
like?
this is my first year doing it.
Okay.
A good friend and I have been on sort of a project over the last 2 months to see them all, kind of on a whim, and we've done pretty well. We've really powered through a lot, so I think
Good.
we're
You know,
gonna get it
it's
done.
good just to see them and like get to debate, you know,
Yeah,
their
it's
work there.
fun. It's fun. Yeah.
There's a friend of mine will sometimes go to these Best Picture marathons that AMC, the movie chain, will do. So
Uh
they'll show all the Best Picture movies in a row, back to
huh. It sounds horrible. It sounds like
for
the
like
least fun thing
yeah.
possible.
You just like sit there for like 16
Ugh.
hours and slowly go insane.
Yikes.
He always tweets
Yikes.
from it, so I enjoy that, but I would not subject myself to
Definitely not.
it.
Definitely not. I like going to East Street Cinema in DC because it's all underground and cell phones don't work. So
Yes, that's my
it's
favorite.
awesome. It's so
You should
good.
check out the Angelica pop-up
I've
in
been there.
DC.
Yeah, we saw
Yeah,
Whiplash there.
awesome. Yeah, that's
Super
a really
cool.
fun theater. It's like
Yeah.
super out of the way, and it's got all these crazy exploitation posters on the wall. I love
And
it.
you can get really good food beforehand at Union Market. One of the funnest things about doing this Best Picture project has been going to all these different theaters that I wouldn't have
Hmm.
gone to otherwise. So that's a whole other conversation. But movie theater design and what works and
Absolutely.
what doesn't and everything. Really interesting. So
Yeah, I love talking about that stuff.
yeah. Well, thank you so much. This was really fun. I learned a
Gotcha.
ton. It was a blast, and I hope your heart doesn't get totally destroyed on Sunday.
I'll be fine.
Okay. Bye.
Okay, take care.